Syracuse football lands its second player in the class of 2026.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Earlier this afternoon, the news broke that Syracuse football landed its second commit in the class of 2026, and I'm here to talk about it. This is Jaxson Holzer of Locked On Syracuse, and thank you so much for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, Syracuse football landed its second verbal commitment in the class of 2026 from three-star cornerback from California, Jaxson Gates. That's right. He does have a great first name. Now, unfortunately for Jaxson, he doesn't quite spell it the correct way. It should be C-K-S-O-N, but, he goes X-S. All right, fine, but at least it's the same name. Jaxson Gates, a three-star cornerback from California, pledged his verbal commitment to Syracuse University this afternoon, according to Mike McAllister over at 24/7 Sports. Gates, he has solid size for a cornerback at this age. He is only a junior in high school right now, but he is listed as 6'1", 170 pounds, which is certainly pretty good size for a cornerback. And as I have said, Gates is the second verbal commitment in the class of 2026. We'll talk about the second one later on in this mini podcast. Gates has actually been to the last two Syracuse football games. And honestly, I don't blame him for committing after the last two games, because he's actually from California, like I said, and he was at the Syracuse-Cal game, which, by the way, Syracuse pulled off a big upset in that one, and they really played their best game of the season in front of Jaxson Gates, right? And then last week, he was in the Dome in attendance for Syracuse versus UConn, and I know it was only a 7-point game. It was the biggest blowout for a 7-point game I have ever seen, so he saw two quality wins for Syracuse football. I am not surprised that he said, you know what? I kind of want to commit after that one. So, what has Jaxson Gates said about Syracuse? This is coming from 24/7 Sports' Mike McAllister. He was the one who got these quotes, and I will link the article in the description below if you would like to read it. But on his recruitment, he said, quote, "The biggest reason I decided to choose Syracuse is because the program is on the rise. Coach Fran has done so much to the program in just 1 year. And with him being the DB coach, I know he can develop me into the best player possible." So there's a couple of things I take away from that statement, okay? The first of which is that Syracuse football is certainly a program on the rise. They're 8-3 right now. They've coming off back-to-back victories. Syracuse football with their second 8-win regular season, keywords are regular season, of the 21st century. The only other time they have won 8 games in a regular season in the 21st century is 2018. So they are certainly a program on the rise, especially with a first-year head coach in Fran Brown. And by the way, I will highlight the accomplishments of Fran Brown at the end of the season because I feel like that's the most appropriate time to do it. But I'll give you a little tease on that. Fran Brown is arguably the greatest first-year head coach in the history of Syracuse football. That's all I'll say on that. I have done a lot of research on this. I'm telling you, what he is doing right now is pretty much unprecedented at Syracuse University as a first-year head coach. So he's definitely got the program headed in the right direction. It is definitely a program that is on the rise. I'm also not surprised that a defensive back is attracted to a school like Syracuse. Remember Fran Brown's background. He was the defensive backs coach over at Georgia. Now he's the head coach at Syracuse. But the way you got to look at it is, hey, he does have a specialty, and the specialty is defensive backs. We know that Fran Brown can recruit, and he can really recruit defensive backs. In 2024, so his first class, he got Marcellus Barnes, a Rivals and On-3 4-star recruit. Pretty big-time recruit right there, Marcellus Barnes. In 2025, He was once in the class of 2026, but he reclassified, committed to UF. Now he's back with Syracuse. But Demetrius Samuel, a consensus 4-star recruit and currently the best player in the class of 2025. And then in 2026, he got Gates, Jaxson Gates here, who's not necessarily on the level of the first two guys that I mentioned as far as where he sits in recruiting rankings. But I think this demonstrates that my point that I'm not surprised that defensive backs would be attracted to a school like Syracuse because the head coach is a former defensive backs coach at one of the most prestigious college football programs in the nation at Georgia, and now he's at Syracuse. So I'm not surprised there. But the big news, earlier this afternoon, Syracuse football gets its second commit in the class of 2026. Jaxson Gates, a 3-star corner over on Rivals. Congratulations to Jaxson Gates, and we hope that he signs in about a year from now. Just remember, these are only verbal commitments, all right? So take that for what it's worth. But hopefully this is one that can stick for the long haul. So we talked a little bit about Jaxson Gates and what he said about the program. Now coming up, who is the other commit in the class of 2026 right now? Let's talk about it. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Let's talk about Syracuse football in terms of this season, right? They have one more game left in the regular season. That is this Saturday against Miami. It's a big-time matchup against those Hurricanes. Cam Ward, Kyle McCord. The Orange open as 10.5-point underdogs at home against Miami. What do you think of those odds? Well, you can let FanDuel know. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Basketball season is in full swing, whether it's the NBA, college, Syracuse basketball games. They're typically very exciting, especially Syracuse, right? It doesn't matter who they're playing. They could be playing Texas Tech, Texas, or Lemoyne, and the game is going to be pretty much the same. It's going to be tight from wire to wire. So you're always going to get an exciting game with Syracuse. And the way I get tickets for games, for basketball games in general, but also Syracuse games, is by using Gametime. Gametime is a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. And Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. My favorite feature is the curated deals. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc., whatever you want. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. This is Locked On Syracuse, and I'm Jackson Holzer. And on today's mini podcast, we are going over the breaking news from this afternoon, which is that Syracuse football landed its second verbal commit in the class of 2026 with 3-star cornerback from California, Jaxson Gates, saying it today. Congratulations to Jaxson Gates. Now let's go over who the second commit is in the class of 2026. And he has been committed for quite a while, and that is D'Antae Sheffey. Sheffey is a running back, 5'10", 190 pounds from Pennsylvania. Sheffey is a consensus 3-star recruit across all the major recruiting sites. The key thing about D'Antae Sheffey, and hopefully Syracuse football can keep him in their list of commits, because remember, as I said earlier, these are only verbal commitments. They're still a ways away from signing, okay? But it's better to have a verbal commit than not have a verbal commit. It's just important to keep in mind. The way to keep D'Antae Sheffey is pretty simple. I had on Locked On recruiting analyst Brian Smith on the podcast over the summer, and we talked about D'Antae Sheffey. And the main thing that he said was, if Penn State does not get involved, then Syracuse is in good shape for a guy like D'Antae Sheffey. However, if Penn State does get involved, they typically are the ones that can kind of snatch particularly a Pennsylvania kid away from Syracuse. So keep an eye on that. However, I did a little bit more research on Penn State, and they do have a verbal commit at the running back position already in the class of 2026, and that is Messiah Mickens. Mickens is an elite 4-star recruit to the point where On3 industry rankings have him as a top 100 overall player in the country. So, of course, typically schools will take more than one player at each position, but that's just something to keep in mind, that Penn State does have an elite running back already in its 2026 class. So maybe the urgency to go get another one isn't as high. That's the way I look at it. They do have an elite running back already committed in Messiah Mickens. All right, but all you really need to know about this mini podcast, that's D'Antae Sheffey, by the way, the other commit in the class of 2026 for Syracuse, is that Jaxson Gates announced his verbal commitment to Syracuse football this afternoon. Congratulations to Jaxson Gates. Coming up on the podcast tomorrow is another mini podcast. We are talking about a 2025 defensive back that is predicted to land with Syracuse football. The early signing period is coming up. Syracuse football could be getting themselves an elite defensive back in the class of 2025. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's mini podcast, but don't worry, it's not going to be all mini podcasts going forward. Tuesday is going to be a full podcast. Wednesday, a full podcast. We'll see what Thanksgiving is, but Friday, in all likelihood, there will be something as well. So don't worry, full podcasts are still around. I just like doing these mini podcasts sometimes to talk about some of these recruits. All right. I'm Jaxson Holzer. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening to Locked On Syracuse. If you liked it, click this like button. If you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And everyone, take care.